Hi everyone, welcome to my review of An American Werewolf in London, directed by John Landis in 1981. So finally, we are here to talk about this film, and yes, here it is on Blu-ray, indeed, and yes, spoilers alert if you've not seen the film. Don't watch this review, preferably watch the film first, and then of course come back. There will be spoilers in this review, but yes, here it is, and the last film I would like to talk about, specifically for Halloween kind of season here. Not that I just watch films, for Halloween, horror films. I watch horror films whenever I want. But yes, specifically, of course, for Halloween, the kind of season. It's a few days after Halloween. But I would like to talk about this, and I've rewatched it, of course, tonight. Tonight is Saturday. Yes, this film, I must say now, I love this film so much. I really adore it, and I think, it's a film that I've seen so many times. Yes, indeed, and it's such a kind of nostalgic film to me. It was one of the first horrors that I saw, actually, and it's just so good. This film, of course, many have talked about it, although it's kind of more of a cult film than anything, really. It seems weirdly, it's a British-American film, of course. Directed by John Landis. I've not seen really any of his other films, but I do want to kind of, especially, I'm looking forward to seeing, the Blues Brothers. Yes, absolutely, and yes, a few other ones, of course. Animal House. I've never seen that actually before, but yes, I think mainly, of course, known for comedy films, and this again is a comedy. It's a comedy horror though, and very, very unique stuff here, and. Yes, of course, Edgar Wright, is one such director who really, really praises this film. It's one of his favourites, I believe, and I think, great taste there. And of course, it is definitely, of course, influenced his work. Especially, Shaun of the Dead. This comedy horror kind of way, and this is a film that I just love. I think, I've seen this many times, a number of times. When I was off school, I was off school quite a lot when I was younger, sometimes because I was ill, other times, I guess a lot of people can understand. But yes, this was one of them films, I must say, that I watched, when I was off of school, for whatever reason, and yes, just, kind of watching this film again and again, I love this so much. One of the first horrors that I ever saw, actually, and yes, just... Wow, just as a comedy horror, this is really a perfect blend. Really, really is, and I think, as well, it's really interesting is the fact that it's kind of the first film that was awarded, given the Oscar for best makeup. Quite surprising, when you really think about that. But of course, a great one to kind of kickstart this kind of award, if you will. Because this really is some of the best, just in cinema. I think this is certainly, if someone asked, just for the record, this is one of my favourite horrors, and it's just wow. The practical effects, in general, are some of the very, very finest, I believe, in cinema. I really think it's right up there with films. In this vein, you can compare it to The Thing, of course. I think. It's on that level, really. The practical effects, they are so good, and really probably has the best werewolf. Well, absolutely, actually, for me, the best werewolf transformation in a film. This is masterful. This is genius. I'm in awe of this. The effects in this film, all practical. Here this is cinema. This is just stunning, and the way, of course, the hairs come out of of the follicles, that is just so genius. Of course, playing things, the threading through there backwards, that was done, and then you've got just the way, the whole body, is stretching, of course. When David, of course, is transforming into a werewolf for the first time, and yes, it's about an hour into the film, really. This is just wow, what a film. Very, very short, just under 100 minutes. Without the credits, it's about 90 minutes, really. But yes, this is one special film for me. I think it's just I love everything about this film. From the opening, credits, Bobby Vinton's version of Blue Moon, of course, and I love all these. And I did include this in my. At least I mentioned it in my favourite horror soundtracks of all time last year. That was, I think, a list I'd done for around Halloween time. I'm guessing. I talked about this one because I love this soundtrack. I love the Elmer Bernstein score, of course, but the songs that are injected into this, and funnily they all have this kind of they're related in the title to Moon, Moon Dance, of course, Van Morrison. You've got different renditions, different versions, of course, of Blue Moon, and this opening one is just wow, wonderful, one eerie way, and it's kind of opened the film as well. You see this wonderful, these wonderful shots, of course, the scenery there, but it's kind of this beauty to it, but it's really quite scary. This is this very, very scary film. The opening is very disturbing, while also, of course, being a hilarious film, and that's something that I'm always very, very impressed in. Kind of how a director, how filmmakers and writers can pull off a horror film that's also a comedy film, because it's very, very hard to do. Of course, you would maybe think the comedy can ruin a horror, and make it unbelievable, less scary, but this is one of them unique ones, one of them perfect ones for me, that just I think the horror enhances the comedy. The comedy kind of makes the horror more believable in many, many ways, while also it's a film that doesn't fully take itself seriously all the time, but it does when it needs to, and it's just such a unique film. And I think the way that this is pulled off, the tone of the film is flawless for me. Again, I know this is not everyone's cup of tea, the type of humour perhaps, the way it's kind of yes, I guess a lot of people understandably, they don't like comedy horrors. That's absolutely fine. They don't like this. This is very much a very particular type of comedy, humour, I must say. But I personally love it. I think it's definitely a masterpiece for me, and the way the blend of this comedy and horror is just stunning. But yes, the opening shots, the music, of course, setting the tone, and these two young Americans on this kind of, I believe it's 3 months, this trip, this holiday that they're on, students, of course, backpacking, very, very kind of charming here, kind of setup, of course, and they start off in what is believed to be the Yorkshire Moors, although this was filmed in Wales, I believe. Very interesting. But yes, just this wonderful opening, in the countryside, of course, and this wonderful scenery. Although this is kind of a very dark film, at times, of course, and the opening is very gloomy. Kind of, it's not something that's fully, there isn't much sun in the film. It's kind of shot a lot of the film, at least, over during the winter. So yeah, it's mostly all on location, which is just so amazing, and it's so authentic, this film. It really literally feels like it's happening, especially in these moments. And yes, David and Jack, David Naughton plays David, and Griffin Dunne, of course, plays Jack, and yes, these two friends. And this opening is them, kind of trying to find shelter. And they go to this pub, called the Slaughtered Lamb. They arrive there, and they walk in, of course, and kind of I love how this is kind of like a Hammer film, Hammer production, where you walk in, or going further back. I love this classic, bit more British kind of event than more than anything, kind of way in which you walk in somewhere and everyone stops talking, it all goes silent. It's just a really, I love this kind of trope, if you will, this particular thing that happens in quite a lot of horrors, and it does remind me of the Hammer films, a few of them, and yes, I just love this. They go in, of course, and everyone stops, and just so atmospheric. But in that scene as well, so much great comedy. The scene, the kind of story that the guy tells, in particular, the story there, it's just hilarious. And then, of course, going right back to the kind of, strange, kind of eerie, atmospheric feel this film has. And then, of course, they step back out. They don't think they want to stay there. Yes, they start getting stalked, of course, by what we know as a werewolf. And yes, of course, Jack is killed. And then, of course, David is injured. He wakes up 3 weeks later, as we know, in this hospital in London. And then it unfolds from there, as we know, the nightmares, which is just some of the scariest images in film for me, but and it just has this atmosphere. Wow, when he's in the hospital, of course, you know, that nightmare, of course, when he's you see himself sitting in the bed, you know, and you see the face come up. Wow, that gets me every time. You know, it's such a scary scene. And if you just pause it on that, or you just look at the actual image of that face, you know, I've rarely seen. You know, it just reminds me of The Exorcist, of course, the demon face. It's one of the scariest, you know, faces in cinema. It really, really is. It gets me every time, and just wow, you know, all the makeup and everything, just masterful in this film. And then, of course, you know, as we know, he forms this romance, you know, with Alex, a nurse, of course. Basically, she falls for him, and played by Jenny Agutter, and she is so good in this film, so likable. And I love this. I love this romance. You know, I really do. Actually, I think it really is great, and I love the kind of the connection they have, and how it kind of it adds a real element of tragedy to the film. You know, of course, as we know, once David, you know, in the end does die. You know, getting shot, of course, by the police there and stuff, because you know, once he gets out into the streets at the end, and you know, it's really, really tragic, and it ends, you know, on that shot, and then weirdly, you know, going into the kind of upbeat, you know, another rendition of you know, that song, and just wow, you know, this film very, very short, you know, but it's just, you know, it covers the full kind of cycle here of the werewolf, and you know, kind of there's so much humanity in this film. The comedy is just genius. It is for me, really, really is, and I can't wait, of course, to check out, you know, more of John Landis films. You know, I think the Blues Brothers, Animal House, of course, especially, and yes, you know, I think the comedy in this film, you know, is just, it's so unique. It's so kind of just, you know, it is just this. It's kind of I think of American Werewolf in London. I think there isn't really any comedy like it, although you can kind of yeah, you can take some films and kind of say they're similar, but there's something so unique about this film, and I think just so enjoyable for me. I think the way that kind of the narrative progresses, you know, it's very, very, it's just so investing. You know, I love how kind of Jack is kind of present here and there throughout the whole film, even though he's killed, you know, kind of in the opening, 17 minutes it is, you know, until, you know, you get to the hospital scene, you know, and that's, of course, after that, you know, he's dead, but he's the undead, as we know, and yes, I think, you know, this is just amazing, of course, how you see him different points in the film. He's more kind of decaying and kind of rotting away and kind of decomposing. You know, and at the end of the film, basically, one of the last scenes, he's basically a skeleton. It's so good, and of course you see the other victims as well. You know, David's victims when he does actually change into a werewolf, and yes, it's just hilarious there as well. You know, the blood, of course. You know, there's a lot of gore in this film. Very, very violent film, and you know, but it's something where, for example, the scene in the underground. Wow, that is one of the most suspenseful, you know, just terrifying kind of moments in a horror film, and it's so kind of subtle, and you don't see, of course, the werewolf, you know, David in full form here. You just, you know, that shot when you're kind of course, the escalator, you know, from the top there, and you see right far down, just right in the distance there, you see, of course, the werewolf kind of, you know, coming in there, and you know, the victim, of course, helpless there. That is one of the most eerie shots, you know, terrifying, disturbing shots I've ever seen. It's just a mastery of horror filmmaking here, and just, you know, but it's just, you know, it's a film, as I say, you know, the comedy, it's so much comedy in this film. It never detracts from this being a scary film, at least when there is scary moments. You know, this is a film that, of course, you know, it's something that is, you know, it's played for laughs a lot of the time, and but as I say, it's one of these unique films where the comedy, of course, even by, for example, you know, the doctor there, he acts like he, you know, it's very, very kind of humorous performance. One where, you know, it's just so funny, this performance. I love it, you know, kind of how he's being overly serious, perhaps in the role, but it's all intended, you know, it's kind of this dry humour that's just so amazing, and I love how, you know, he's saying, there's a line in the film where he's basically saying it's a full moon, and then he says, "Where's David?" It's just hilarious, and I think, you know, the scenes where he goes to investigate back in you know, in the moors, at the slaughtered lamb, great scenes here. You know, it's just hilarious, but also, you know, so kind of disturbing as well, and how this kind of community there perhaps kind of covers this whole thing up. you know, and that is so well established, that kind of community there, and the ones that do know about this, you know, and I think that's one of the key elements that makes this so, for me, kind of believable as well. It is a comedy film, but the believability of this kind of this occurrence, and I think it's just when, of course, you see that transformation, wow, 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 and you know, of course, the final act is all out carnage, of course, on the streets of London, and I think, yeah, it's just also great. I will note to kind of see these, you know, these occasions, of course, you know. Of course, growing up near London, just outside of London, it's just great to see this as well. And yeah, it's just the way, I think the way the locations are used in this film is just so effective. From the moors, of course, you know, filmed in Wales, of course, but all this, you know, in the countryside and, you know, in the city, and you know, it's just such a unique film, written and directed by John Landis, and the script of this film is just so sharp, it's so witty, and you know, it's all got kind of meanings behind it all, and it's just so well executed. These characters, I love these characters. I love the narrative overall. David and Jack, you know, the kind of friendship and this relationship as it's kind of, it's so bizarre. This film, it's one of the most you know, insane films perhaps, but it's just genius. It really, really is, in the way it's kind of pulled off, and the blend of comedy and horror. The acting, especially David Naughton, is just stunning in this film. Frank Oz as well, you know, makes a kind of little kind of cameo perhaps, you know, as a certain character, and of course, and you know, Miss Piggy, as we know, when there's a scene, you know, kind of in one of the nightmare scenes when the kids are watching, you know, the Muppets, of course. It's really, really interesting there to kind of see Frank Oz appear in the film, and yes, just these performances. Jenny Agutter, so good. This romance, very romantic film, and you know, as I say, the tragedy, of course, when David is shot at the end, you know, it really is very, very affecting in the end. But it's just so much fun to see this kind of, you know, how this affects David. You know, this whole kind of this him becoming, you know, a werewolf, and the abilities, you know, the feeling that he has as well. You know, after he first kind of changes perhaps, and he wakes up and he sees you know, Alex again, and, you know, he's got loads of energy, you know, and it's just these weird things, of course, that, you know, he's you know, the way he's kind of the temperature, the reaction to temperatures, of course, in the film, his appetite as well, you know, it's all these things that are just so so well explored in the film, the kind of this these effects, you know, of being a werewolf, but also for comedy, so good, the comedy in this film, and the way it kind of has this, well, it's a really, really satirical film, of course, and just so effective. Wow, and just every actor, I think, just builds and builds the momentum to this. You know, I'm so invested in this kind of this character, and you know, all these relationships he has, you know, and stuff. But it's just so kind of such a compelling film, and you know, it's constantly so much fun. You know, hilarious, scary film, and just in the filmmaking, you know, this is directed so wonderfully. The way the film was shot, very eerie, of course, and I love just the way that, as I say, you know, kind of London is portrayed as well, and these shots, of course, in the underground there, you know, very creepy place, and you know, this is a film that can bring that out. You know, it kind of brings out the kind of feeling that can have as well. You know, being, you know, the isolation, you know, the kind of you know, the way that there's no one there at that point, of course. That guy's getting chased, that victim, and yes, you just I love the effects in the film. I love the gore. I love the transformation scene is just one of my favorite kind of horror scenes. You know, just in cinema, and yes, just I love just in general these moments of comedy throughout the film. So good, and just wow, what a film. I love the locations. You know, the feeling the film has. You know, it's sometimes you know, kind of hard to describe. Sometimes how, you know, about atmosphere in a film, and especially one like this, but I think you know, it just has a particular feeling that I really respond to so much, and the atmosphere throughout is just so consistent. I love the soundtrack. I love the visuals, the characters, of course, and while it's more of a, you know, very you know, it's a hilarious film, this, and you know, I think it's a horror film at times, obviously, as well. But you know, just the way that in the end, you know, it is definitely very much so focused on, you know, the kind of this character and the value of these characters and relationships and the humanity of it all, and you know, is very, very tragic in the end, as we know. That's just my thought on the film. You know, thoughts on the film there. I think it just really is very sad in the end. But you know, the ride, what a ride it is, just constantly, you know, kind of so much fun, so investing. I love this film, as I say, and yes, it does actually get a plus tier. It certainly does. You know, not extremely high within these plus tiers, but it does get 100% plus tier 3. Yes, indeed. I think you know, that I can justify this. I certainly love this film. I think it is quite a special, you know, masterpiece, if you will. It really is kind of a truly meaningful film to me. I love this film so much. I think just so inspirational, you know, in the filmmaking, but just how invested in, you know, this character is, especially, you know, the protagonist, of course, of David. So good, and so much great performances in this film. The kind of tone, you know, very hard to pull off, but wonderfully done here. The satirical kind of ways in which this works, you know, in the script, in the performances, and just the whole kind of you know, the situations in this film, and how kind of David is seeing Jack. No one is believing him, of course. You know, but it is, of course, happening. Of course, he's questioning his sanity as well, and it's something that he can quite easily kind of you can think within the context of this, perhaps, you know, for example, he's just had this this trauma, and of course, he rightfully, you know, you could think he could be, you know, kind of experiencing this because of the trauma, but in fact, you know, Jack is appearing to him, and you know, he is actually kind of, you are seeing these characters, the victims, of course, and you know, no one else is believing him at first. I just love the way this kind of, they do gradually kind of you know, kind of catch on, but it's done for, you know, in a comedy way, but ironically, I think it's just more believable than quite a few you know, horror films in this sense. I think this is one of the great things about the film, in which the comedy is you know, it's always there pretty much, at least around the corner, but it's always enriching and not hindering the horror elements, and that is something that's very commendable, I think. And this film, for me, it's just a masterpiece of cinema. You know, the visuals, the storytelling here, the way it involves me, it invests me in this kind of this whole kind of you know, fantastical, you know, horror, you know, kind of these elements, of course, you know, it being a werewolf film, and I just love this so much. And I think, you know, this is just one of the among the best horror films for me ever made, and just stunning film. Certainly my top 20 favourite horror films. That's what I'll say there. The soundtrack, the practical effects, of course, so good. You know, just, and the score as well. Elmer Bernstein, of course, working on the score here. So good. You know, so atmospheric, so eerie, and of course these upbeat songs. You know, perhaps you know, as well as the opening song, of course, Blue Moon, Bobby Vinton's version. It's all just combined to make an absolute masterpiece, in my opinion. So yes, tell me your thoughts in the comments, of course. Really interested to see what people think of this film. So unique, and I personally love this film. Seen it many times, of course, and just one of my favourite you know, horror films, really, of all time. And yes, just, you know, the 80s for me is really the best decade overall for horrors. I think this is just one of the masterpieces, you know, in the genre of horror, and you know, among my favourite comedies as well. Really, just a perfect blend, really, of everything. Just wow, stunning film, as I've said. And yes, you know, tell me what your thoughts are on this film, as I say. And yes, what did you watch? You know, for Halloween. I know it's a few days after now, but yes, you know, what did you watch to kind of celebrate this you know, season? And yes, you know, I love this film, and yes, certainly we'll be checking out you know, films like The Blues Brothers very soon, actually. Cannot wait, of course. Very much looking forward to this, and you know, I can't wait to talk about them. And yes, as always, thanks for watching my review.